Yo, man. I love that intro. I love that intro. Every time I hear that intro, I just want to dance, but I can't dance. So I better not. What's up, everybody? Happy Wednesday to you. I already see my brother Rick in the comment section. Good to see you. Good to see all of you that are here with us. Listen, like, share, subscribe, because we have an amazing conversation today. I see my auntie already in. Hey, auntie, love you so much. Thanks for being here. You are one of the faithful ones. And I think, auntie, I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. I think it's going to be an enlightening conversation. Y'all know how I do. I like to get right into it. I don't like to keep you waiting. But before I get right into it, let me preface what I'm about to say, or let me preface, this broadcast by saying, if you hear me slurring a little bit with a little bit of a lisp, it's because I lost a tooth, y'all. Yeah, I lost a tooth. I should have gone to the dentist, but I lost a tooth, and it's causing some discomfort. And so if my lisp is heavier than normal, it's because my tooth is gone, and for whatever reason, it's impacting my speech. But nonetheless, we are here, and we're gonna make it happen. I want to read something to you that I posted on Facebook. And I think this is a good way to start the conversation. This is what I just posted on Facebook. I said, African Americans and Indigenous Americans have a shared history. We both know what it's like to be terrorized and treated inhumanely by the white supremacist machine. We both know what it feels like to be victims of governmental theft, whether it's the theft of our bodies or our land. In spite of the odds, we've both, in spite of the odds, we've both endured. Hold on. In spite of the odds, we've both endured as a lasting testimony to the strength and ingenuity of our people. The parallels are clear. African Americans and Indigenous Americans can hum the same tune, just in a different key. Since the historical similarities abound, I've often wondered if similarities exist between the legacy of the Black church and the legacy of the Indigenous church. I've searched for scholarship on this question, but I haven't found any. This is actually something that I've thought about, something that I've grappled with, something that I've really been interested in, because we as African Americans, we are linked with our Indigenous brothers and sisters in our experience within this country. Oppression, just the systemic injustices, intentional marginalization. We've both seen the worst this country has to offer, and I've often thought about how that Auntie Millicent is watching as well. Love you, Auntie Millicent. I've often thought about how our shared experiences translates into our engagement and experience with Christianity, right? So I'm a student of Black church history, but I don't know much about the Indigenous church in America, and I don't know much about how my beautiful Indigenous brothers and sisters came to know Christ. And I'm sure that there are parallels. I'm sure that the story is similar in some regards, in some aspects. And additionally, I'm sure that there's a lot that I can learn, and that we can learn, and that the Black church can learn from the Indigenous church. And I'm all for that, y'all. I really, really, really am excited about the conversation, and I'm excited about the person that I will be conversing with. My friend, my brother, the Right Reverend Phil Fox is with us today. Phil Fox. I don't have any sound effects, but let me just okay, there's my sound effect. All right. Phil, for the sake of the people that don't know you in the audience, can you just introduce yourself?
Hey, Doshadzi Maragua Midishi Mahagadesh Hets. My beastigids. My name is Mahagadesh is in my native tongue, but I am Uh, my name is defeats the enemy in the English language. This name was given to me by my grandfather, who served time in the military, which gave him the right to give me this name. This name is normally carried by fighting men or women that have gone to war. But my grandfather told me that he was giving me this name because whenever I wake up in the morning, he said, I enter battle every day in the spiritual realm on behalf of our people, so that I carry this name proudly, and I try to bring honor to this name, because it is an honor to hold this name, because I am not a fighting person. I did not serve in the military or the armed forces in any fashion. Um, and but also, I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the lands of the Anishinaabe and the Potawatomi people here in southeastern Michigan. That's where I now live. But I myself am from the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara people that are located in what's now known as North Dakota. I am the Low Cap clan and a child of the Prairie Chicken. And the reason why that it's important for me to say these things is so that way uh, you understand and know who I am, where I come from, but also because I come from what's known as an honor shame society. And when I turn on my camera or I join an interview or do anything like this, I'm not just representing myself, my English name, Phil Fox, but I am representing my wife, my children, my parents, my grandparents, my clans, and my greater tribes, and ultimately my native indigenous people. So that is why I introduce myself in such a way. I know it seems belabored and it seems very long, but this is the way that I was taught and the things that I was told. And also, before we get started and we go any further, I need to excuse myself in front of any of my elders that may be watching. I'm not an old man, but I'm also not I'm not a young man, but I'm also not an old man. So I know that there are those who might be in the audience who have more life experience and may be more advanced in age than I am. So I please ask for your forgiveness and for your grace for me to be speaking in front of you today with my brother Isaiah. Aho.
We are honored to have you on. Thank you for that. I am so looking forward to this conversation. We've got BK Apologists in the
Brother
chat. What's
BK.
up? What's up? What's up, Alfredo? Good to see you, man. Rick is chiming in. He says, "Bro, I love it every time Brother Phil Fox honors his heritage and the way he introduces himself. In introducing himself, you get the sense that you're meeting all his people in him." Amen, and ditto to that. So before we dive in, I wanted to ask you a question, because when we were setting up this conversation, I inboxed you on Facebook and I sent you some images that I thought about putting on the YouTube thumbnail.
Mm-hmm.
And you sent me an image back that I ultimately put on the thumbnail, and I was fascinated by the image. So I just, if you can you talk to us about this image? I thought it was a beautiful image, and can you just talk to us about this image?
Yeah, so this image is actually a stylization and representation of Jesus in the indigenous form or indigenous representation. But more specifically, this represents one of the most popular in Native country styles of worship. This represents a ceremony that many throughout Native country actually they they honor. It's called the Sundance, and essentially what they do is, in all intents and purposes, it's an atonement ceremony. And so what they do is they tether themselves to a tree as part of the ceremony. There's other things that they do that essentially are self-mutilating in nature, as an atonement for the blessings that Creator has given us. And it's essentially a repayment, or they would classify it as more of like a thank you to Creator. And so what it represents for me. And actually, I have this picture hanging up in my house. When you first come in the door, this is going to be the first picture that you'll see, because for those of us who understand and know who Jesus is, for me, this represents the fact that Jesus has already done the Sundance for us. So the cross is a representation of the atonement, just like how the system of the Sundance itself is an atonement ceremony. But again, just like many traditions that are throughout the world, whether and again, we can trace this all the way back to Acts chapter 15 and with the Jerusalem Council, right?
Yeah.
They were trying to figure out, what customs and ceremonies and things do we need to adhere to in order to be proper Christ followers and following God, right? So again, my indigenous people, one of the major stumbling blocks is trying to reconcile what it is that we can properly celebrate and the different ceremonies that we can participate in. But again, this represents the fact that we do not have to do the Sundance anymore because the atonement has already been paid. All the debts have already been paid through the blood and the work of Jesus Christ on the cross.
Wow.
So the fact that this image shows Jesus performing that ceremony, to me, is also a representation. And I know it may seem or look startling or may look different because we have not seen this before. But again, this is a absolute contextualization of being able to share the gospel with my indigenous people.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. My purpose in having this conversation, Phil, is to learn, right? I've done extensive research on the history of the Black church. I'm by no means a scholar, but I have read tons of books. And I just have a hunch that there are parallels that exist between the indigenous experience of Christianity and the African American experience of Christianity in this country. Although I'm not knowledgeable about how indigenous people came to faith, and how Christianity spread. I mean, I know the narratives, just like there are narratives that persist about how Black people came to faith, right? Like white people just put them in headlocks and whipped them to death, and that's right. and those are false narratives, right? And so I want to hear from you, man. I want to talk to you about how indigenous people came to know Christ. I want to talk to you about some of the unique particularities of Christianity amongst indigenous people and how it's contextualized and things of that nature, and any history tidbits, and I think through this conversation, like dots can be connected, right? And I'll be able to say, oh, well, that's like this and that's like that, and we can begin to see some of the parallels and some of the similarities that exist between the Black church and the indigenous church, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's actually it was quite refreshing that I when I stumbled upon the larger urban apologetics family, right? The Dr. Masons and you, because I discovered you early on, and reading Black Church Empowered, and then reading Urban Apologetics 1 and 2, and then just getting to know guys like BK Apologist and Adam Coleman and Matthew Jackson and the whole star-studded cast of Urban Apologetics, and listening to the arguments, or not just the arguments, but listening to the things that they were addressing. It was an uncanny parallel, actually, because of the argumentation that you hear as an African American, and just like some of the examples that you use, or that you were just saying, the white man's gospel, right? We hear that all the time. Well, I hear that all the time as well, because of the historicity and some of the stuff that I've been studying throughout, and on my channel, I've done a lot of work and a lot of teaching on this concept of the doctrine of discovery and this idea of the doctrine of discovery and how that really ties into the historicity and the complexity, right, of the church and the theology of the church and how they were able to marry these types of things. So a lot of that is really the historicity of the church and how it affected our people, just like you said at the beginning. And to sort of go with your quote or your Facebook post, I've always said this. I've always said, you claim, and I don't mean to be divisive when we use white, black, and those types of things. So just please excuse that type of language. But
you can use that language here.
White people, white Christians, you claim that you had came to create this country, and you did it in such a way that was such a beautiful experiment, right? They use that expression, this experiment of the United States. But the thing that I say is, or that I've said, and I actually have a T-shirt on my T Public shop that says, this country was founded on stolen land, using stolen resources, on the backs of stolen people. And how dare you call yourself industrious? Because that is what they used. So to think that they created this country out of nothing, that narrative of American greatness and all these things, and please do not hear my words and think that I'm anti-American by any means. No, actually, my people, my indigenous people in this country, are actually per capita the highest and most overrepresented people that are in the armed forces in America today. Any demographic you can look, and that we've been that way for almost the duration of this country. We've served in the military. We continue to serve in the military because we still see ourselves as the stewards and the protectors of these lands. So please do not hear anything of myself being anti-American. What I want to do, though, is correct the narratives, because the history books are always written by the quote unquote winners, right? But there is a history that is behind that. And those are the perspectives that I try to share, not only just with the masses, but I also need to share them with the church, because the church has a blind eye of this historicity and the histories that are in this country. And so those are some of the similarities and the things that we, I think, collectively are trying to share. And I'm not the only one doing this. There are other indigenous authors, and there's other books that are out there talking about the indigenous perspective. But the problem is, and that's why that's how I started my ministry, Drops of Hope Ministries, is because I literally would do like a 2-minute read, a 1-minute read, little blurb, because historically my people are not readers. Our history was never passed down through the written word. It was always an oral language, hence our stories and our songs and all the things that are said. And we even have seasons and things where we can tell certain stories and those types of things. So there are many things that are parallel to our experience as indigenous people and as African Americans.
So, number one, you frame the history so well, and while it may be triggering for some, it's truth. Okay. And what do we believers believe about truth? That it sets free, right? And so thank you for sharing that. I do have to chase a rabbit for just a second, and forgive me for doing this, because this gentleman said this in the chat. He said, no, Black Americans are English speaking Christians because our slave masters was an English speaking Christian. We were forced into Christianity, basic history. And that's the history believed by somebody that basically doesn't know history. If this gentleman is still listening, this is all I'll say. Don't say anything else until you can tell me what were the first and second Great Awakenings, and how did those events impact enslaved Africans? So if you cannot answer that question, then please don't say anything else, because you don't know history and you're only parroting something that you've heard from the barbershop or from your friends. You don't actually know history. Again, if you're going to say something else, you have to answer this question. The first and second Great Awakenings, what were they, and how did those events impact enslaved Africans? All right. So Phil, help us to understand the embrace of Christianity amongst indigenous people. How did that? Do you know the history behind what region of the country embraced it first? Was there a specific tribe that really worked as missionaries to other tribes? What's some of that history, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. So I don't know, and I don't know if there's a recorded, specific tribe, but for many of the narratives and the things that were written even by the first settlers and such, and their diaries and whatnot, showed that actually Christianity was embraced heavily by indigenous people, because the core tenets and core values of the indigenous tribes are essentially would be New Testament church values. Things like community, right? The tribe survived. So here's a concept for us that kind of, I think, would help set the table. So in America, our value of being able to gather as much wealth and to show your bank account, and the accumulation of wealth shows how wealthy you are. So in my culture, actually, the amount that you can give away is a testimony to your actual wealth and to show your influence and power. And those things were the model of the New Testament, right?
Yeah.
The New Testament believers, they sold all their riches. So what? So that nobody went without. It was a community. So in first contact, when they were telling these Bible stories and telling about Jesus and his forgiveness and all these things, most of the indigenous people actually accepted quite early the Christian message. But it wasn't until the tables turned and the obvious differences in the actual differences in actual Christianity versus things that were done in the name of Christianity. And that's a major theme that we need to understand, because there is Christianity, right? And then there were things that were done under the name of Christianity. And the things that were done in the name of Christianity are the major stumbling blocks that cause our people, African American and indigenous, those are the things that are stumbling our people, is those things that were done in the name of Christianity. They were not Christian things. Slavery was not a Christian value. The theft of land and the otherizing of people, whole people groups, was not a Christian value. So there and again, most of these things and most of the indigenous people were actually accepting of the early gospel message.
And you're unearthing parallels for me. Already. Number one, you talked about Black people in this country. We were prohibited from reading, so we had to rely heavily upon oral tradition. Stories told orally. So there's a parallel there as well. And then this embrace of Christianity, right? Because it spoke to like existential realities or values that we held deeply. For indigenous folks, it was community, right? And it was togetherness. For us, it was, like freedom, you know what I mean? Like the Exodus narrative resonated with us. And it was like, wow, God cares about enslaved people, and he doesn't just care about enslaved people, he humanizes them, right? And
Right.
so there was this draw towards the Exodus narrative, and to not the Jesus as articulated by the slave master, but to the Jesus who was the son of the Father. And this link, like whoever Jesus is, he's liberative. He's got to be like, he's got to be like the God of the Exodus, right? And so I see these parallels unearthed that like Christianity spoke to some of the values that we held. Christianity spoke to some of our internal longings, and from what I hear you saying, there are parallels also to like acknowledging that we saw the hypocrisy of what was done in the name of Christianity, or what was called Christianity, that really was an affront to true Christianity, because what was called Christianity by this nation and by many of the sort of the quote unquote power brokers within this nation was actually a skewing and a perversion of Christianity to promote white supremacy, to promote the doctrine of discovery, to promote all of these really anti-Christ philosophies that ultimately, harmed indigenous folks and Black folks.
Yeah. One of the major things too is, the formation of boarding schools. Many people may have heard of boarding schools, and they think that these things were so far away. It's a part of the history, and oh my gosh, it was an atrocity. But the remnants of how that of the remnants of what happened in the boarding school is still alive today. And that's not even like, yes, it's through generational trauma, but there are still people who are boarding school survivors that are alive today. And that's lost upon some people because they think, oh man, those things happened in such a long time ago. And here's a weird concept to think of. I was looking at some of the, and this is kind of a sidebar, but I'll get back to the boarding school stuff. But just to frame the reference, they were still engaging in Indian wars during World War I. So tanks were rolling, and we were still throwing bows and arrows and spears and stuff at the U.S. cavalry here in the United States. So to think that these concepts and these things, and I think that's partly what causes, and fuels some of, these other concepts that we battle with, within the church, and, things like Christian nationalism and white superiority and those types of things, is that fact, as they believe that these things are so old and they're so outdated, and why don't you guys just move on? No. My grandmother, I was just sharing with you just before the show that I was raised by my grandmother, and my grandmother was a boarding school survivor. And my last living grandparent, my grandmother on my dad's side, she's still alive now. And I was home just a few months ago for a funeral, and I'm learning all this stuff and learning about the doctrine of discovery, and I'm excited to share with her. And I've have all these new understandings that some of the old ones, like they just couldn't comprehend why all of a sudden they're talking about the love of Jesus, and then in the next moment they're getting their faces slapped because they're speaking their own language. And there was confusion with that. It didn't compute. The hypocrisy was there. And those are the things that were happening in boarding school. And so they would cut their hair, they would take them and they would immediately strip them from any indigenous style clothing and put them in European clothing, because the idea was, then this was formulated by General Pratt in the mid 1800s. The slogan is kill the Indian, save the man. And that was literally the philosophy. And so that is where and yes, this was government sponsored, but the church seen the ability, or they seen the opportunity to then convert these savage people and make them fit to be able to accept the gospel. Because of the doctrine of discovery, that ideology made those who were not white Europeans, it made them, through that ideology, it made them subhuman by that doctrine in practice and in ideology. And they used theology through that, because and people want to distance themselves and say, no, that wasn't the Protestant church. No, that wasn't us. That was a Catholic doctrine, and that was a papal bull. Yes. So at that time, when these papal bulls and such were being formulated, the Reformation was just in its infancy. And so through church history, that was the church, that was Christianity. And to try to separate yourself from that is it's ideologically and it's logically incoherent. And it's also you're not being honest intellectually. Because you want to separate from those things. But those things, the things like boarding school, if you look, even denominations that are Protestant participated in the boarding school apparatus of the government.
My goodness.
And no church, even the heretical Seventh-day Adventists were involved in the boarding school system. And so to exempt yourself and to think that, this stuff was so old and it was such a long time ago. The last boarding school closed in 1993.
Wow.
There are boarding schools that are still open today, but now they're tribally ran boarding schools.
Okay.
And the shift has changed from assimilation to now actual indigenous education.
Okay.
So there are boarding schools that are still around today that are still functioning, but they're not functioning at that capacity. So the change and the flip was 1993. So if you think that's ancient history and that we should just move on from it, and that, we have absolutely no argument as to why, that's why many people today are ashamed of the gospel. That's why many people reject the gospel. Actually, I was just having a conversation as I was getting prepped for this show. I'm in a language chat because our languages are dying because of boarding schools. And I was in a language chat where there was an individual who I've known my whole life, but they hate Christianity because of that, because their parents were marred by that. My grandmother, even though I loved her and she loved me and I knew she loved me, she never once that I remember I think back as many times, but my grandmother, it was not practice for us to even say, I love you. She would not tell us. She would show us, but it was not articulated to us, because her father and her brothers and sisters, they were all marred by that history. They were all their whole outlook on life. They were hardened by this history. And that has gone on. And you can go story after story after story. You can see the abuse and how it affects generations of people. And you have rampant eating disorders, diabetes is rampant on the reservations. Suicide is double the national rate, sometimes triple, depending on which reservation you go to. So even the worst inner city that you can think of, the reservation is worse. And these are all direct causation from this history. So you can't tell me that you're absolved or you're not involved or the church has no responsibility to it.
You bring up something so important, and I think we have to go there because we face similar apologetic aims, right? Because I mean, even in the chat, right? There are people in chat essentially claiming that we're Christians because as black people, we're Christians because of the slave master. Somebody said, how did we view Christianity before slavery? Right. So there's this narrative that black people are Christians because they're in love with Europeans. They're whitewashed. They were forced to be Christians by our slave masters, yada, yada, yada. Right. I'm sure as an indigenous believer, talking to other indigenous people, you probably face some of the same pushback. You probably face, you probably have some of your indigenous brothers and sisters saying your brain has been co-opted by the white man. How could you be a Christian? Look at what they've done. Look at the boarding schools. Look at the Manifest Destiny and how they look at the Trail of Tears and this is all executed by professing Christians. Now, but I want to hear how you respond to that apologetically. However, before you do, I just sometimes I have to chase these rabbits, and this is why I hate looking at the comments when I'm broadcasting, because sometimes I chase rabbits. But somebody asked the question, how did black people?
You got Bantu's something you put on the screen or something.
Yeah. Well, what I put on the screen.
Oh, okay.
Is actually a quote from Mansa Musa, because here's the comment that I'm responding to. The comment is, how did we view Christianity before being slavery? And then there was also a comment that says the Great Awakening comes after the Dum Diversis from Pope Nicholas. You would have to show me a West African Bible and a West African Christian church that predates slavery. So I put up this source from Mansa Musa, Mali, of course. So this is West Africa. This is before the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
And this is essentially, the Christian community was in existence during the reign of great Mansa Musa of the Mali Empire in West Africa, but it's certainly been established at an earlier time. And this is the excerpt from Ibn al-Wadari's text. Again, this predates the transatlantic slave trade. This is proof that Christianity was in Africa and in West Africa before the transatlantic slave trade. And this is what Mansa Musa, who was a Muslim, this is what he said. He said, I heard the magistrate Fakhr al-Din, inspector of the victorious army, say, I asked the king of the Takur, what is the source, like where the gold grows among them? Then he said, it is not in our land, which is the property of the Muslims. Rather, it is in the land that is the property of the Christians of Takur. So there was a land where the Christians were, the Christians of Takur, and there was gold growing among the land. Then he goes on to say, we sin to take from them a collection that is due to us and is required of them. These are special lands that produce gold in this way. They are small pieces of various textures. Some are like small rings, some are like carob seeds, and so on. The magistrate Fakhr al-Din replied, saying, why don't you conquer the land by force? That makes sense, right? Get the gold, conquer it by force. He said, if we conquer them and take it, it does not produce anything. We have done this in various ways, but we have not seen anything in it. But when it returns to the Christians, it produces according to its average. So the gold, the gold comes back, right? They've tried to take it. They've tried to commandeer it, but it doesn't work. When the Christians, for whatever reason, call it miraculous, call it divine intervention, the gold is always reproduced. And it says this is a fascinating dynamic, and this is perhaps an increase in the dominance of the Christians. Again, this is a primary source. making it clear that Christianity was in West Africa before the transatlantic slave trade. Christians were regarded as people that, like, miraculous, crazy things occur, particularly as it pertained to gold, and they had their own land, Christians of Tucker. So I hope that's enough to settle the case and the issue. I'm sorry about that, Phil. So I want to hear from you. Let me take this down. I want to hear from you how you engage apologetically with some of the same pushback that you receive from your indigenous brothers and sisters.
Yeah. So one of the main apologetics that I use is, I spoke about it earlier, is I need to educate. Well, essentially, I need to educate both sides. I educate my indigenous brothers and sisters by letting them know that these things were not done by Christ, nor were they authorized by God. And that's a hard pill for them to swallow, because because they want to blame it on the white man's God, right? You brought your white man's God, and we've never had a devil before. Satan didn't exist until 1492 and all those types of things, that's some of the rhetoric. And and so my job is to educate them and to keep my indigenous brothers and sisters intellectually honest. Because when you're dealing with hurt people, right, sometimes logic goes out the window, just like in these instances where they want to make this about, oh, well, we were hurt by these people, so therefore it's all their fault, and yes, it is their fault in essence, but your understanding of the historicity is tainted by the things that you want to understand, and you want to validate your hurt. And even when you go to study, you're studying essentially for confirmation bias. And so it's important for me, or for any of us who are trying to correct the narrative. It's important for them to understand. And then I also try to then humanize Christ and to show them the similarities, like I did about the Acts 15, that they're not the only ones who are wrestling with this idea of identity, culture, in Christ. The New Testament church was they were wrestling with this as well. But also, one of the things that I try to point out to them is, like, look, listen, Jesus himself, especially Jesus, was not a white man. Jesus, if you actually look in the scriptures, Jesus was a tribal man of the tribe of Judah. And what I get to do, and what excites me, is because if you paid attention in my introduction, I gave to you my clans, and what do our clans do within the larger society? Each clan fulfills a specific duty within the larger society. What did the tribes of Israel do? The tribes of Israel all fulfilled a various function within the larger society and to better the greater kingdom of Israel. So those are the types of apologetics I get to use to show my indigenous brothers and sisters, like, hey, we're not so different. And the fact that you've heard this rhetoric and this narrative of this white man's God, or Jesus was a white man, like, our brother Jerome Gay, the Pantene Pro V white Jesus, like, no, that's not. And that's why I love to show imagery like what we showed at the beginning, because guess what? Jesus was probably brown. He was probably a brown man, and I jokingly say with a larger crown on his nose, you know what I mean? Like just, kind of playing fun with the stereotypes, but like earnestly, in earnest. Jesus was Middle Eastern, probably brown, because they were outside. They were an outdoor people. They labored outside, and they did all these things outside, and they only took shelters during the night, or during the hottest times of the day, but otherwise they were out being productive and in their society, made it as such. So showing these parallels, but also the hard part is, so if there is a difference between this white man's God and who most indigenous call the creator or creator, in my language we call him Dade Mahuba, which means the father spirit. Dade is the word for dad or father, and then Mahuba is the word for spirit, the great spirit, or Maru Dacha, which is the Hidatsa word for the grandfather. And so to show them that if we're going to be intellectually honest, if there's a difference between Maru Dacha or Dade Mahuba and Yahweh, if there's a clear difference, then Dade Mahuba or Maru Dacha have allowed for this to happen to you as well. So we need to be honest intellectually, because if you're blaming it on this one God and saying he's different from creator or whichever representation of creator, because there's each tribe has their name, and then but most of us are, fairly universal that there is one creator God, the creator. And so, and again, like, just sidebar, we didn't worship trees, we didn't worship the grass, we didn't worship the sun, yes, there might have been some tribes may have, but by and large the tribes did not worship those things. Those things we called medicines. And don't over spiritualize or make it hokey, because for us a medicine is just something that helps us. So for us we call water the first medicine. Creation. That's a sidebar, but anyway. So we so those are the types of apologetic tools that I use to show that we're not that far off, and also to correct the narrative. And I can still use that same narrative to show the church using the historicity and the shared values of my indigenous people based upon that time, and the marred image that has been created throughout the history of the United States, and the rhetoric of the noble savage and the guys that just go "Ooh," and then are running with paint on their face. Like, that wasn't us. And please remember, church, that we weren't just going and fighting just because we wanted to pillage. Remember that we were fighting for our lands that were being taken,
systematically stolen.
Right.
Yeah. Listen, guys, this has been one of my favorite, if not my favorite, interview on this channel since I started it a little over a month ago. You are a jewel, Phil, and we love you. I do have a hard stop at 5 p.m. my time. However, I did want to open it up for any questions. Maybe we can take a couple of questions. Again, I do have a hard stop in about 5 minutes. I have a speaking engagement tonight that I have to get dressed for and go to. But I mean, look at the comments. Rick says, powerful.
Appreciate you guys.
Yeah, Jesus lived under colonialism and imperialism.
Yep. That's another shared parallel. I've shared that as well too. Made that.
Yep. My brother David Collins rushed out of Bible study. He says, hey, family, I've just finished teaching Bible study. Time to get my cup filled. Thanks, David, for being here. Appreciate you. Michelle, one of the best mods in all the land, says this was good. This was good, Phil. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, this was really good. We're gonna have to bring you back for a part 2, man.
Absolutely, bro. Yeah,
this has been riveting, man.
Yeah, we can get into Doctrine of Discovery stuff, and
yes,
how that impacted, and the historicity and all that kind of stuff, because there's plenty there, and I'm sure that the audience is probably not as well engaged in the Doctrine of Discovery, because I have some pretty crazy. Yeah, that's true. Actually, BK and I, we actually teased because we both. I don't know about him, but I had family actually that went to the first ever boarding school that was in America, the Carlisle Industrial Indian School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and actually some people from Puerto Rico, the Taínos, they were shipped up there as well. So we jokingly say, "Yeah, we probably had relatives that sat together in that boarding school."
Wow.
But yeah, so that's another piece of history as well.
Yeah, yeah. Regarding Howard Zinn, the Christians that perpetrated massacres and the savagery of colonialism of the first several generations of settlers, they sounded no different from ISIS. Yeah.
It's a hard truth.
Yeah.
And then just maybe as we go out, I know we got to shut down here, but just a few books. There's a gentleman I wish I would have pulled them out, but they're all behind some stuff. But anyway, Rick Barboa had put in there Unsettling Truth by Mark Charles and Sung Chang Ra, which is an excellent book. There's also an author by the name, he's now gone on to be with the Lord, but his name is Richard Twiss. And he had two books. One was Rescuing the Gospel from the Cowboys, and the other one was One Church, Many Tribes. And so those are two powerful books from the Indigenous perspective. Randy Woodley has a book called Indigenous Theology. That's an excellent read as well. Randy Woodley's got a lot of books that are out. So you can look him up too. So he's got a few books from the Indigenous perspective. And yeah, so there's probably more. We can probably share some of those later or whatever, or if we do a part two, if we do get to a part two.
We're doing a part two, Doc.
Okay.
We are doing a part two. And I think the audience, they're clamoring for a part two as well. So we are going to do a part two. Thank you, Phil, for sharing those resources. I hope you guys wrote those down. Listen, you need to follow my brother, Phil. You need to follow Drops of Hope Ministries. He has his own podcast as well. He's doing great work. So go and do that right now.
Yeah. Listen, Mr. Guys, Phil Fox and all your socials. Look me up, Mr. Phil Fox. I'm reachable anywhere.
Yes. Listen, let's not suffer from evangelical short-sightedness. Evangelical short-sightedness is ignoring to their own detriment the contributions, the witness, the history of brown people and black people, indigenous people, the black church, indigenous church, right? Broader evangelicalism says it's just us and everybody else is just kind of on the periphery. Let's not suffer from that type of short-sightedness. We need to learn these histories. We need to learn the truth about the doctrine of discovery. We need to learn the truth about how in the name of Christ, people massacred people and mutilated people and misused and mistreated people so that we do not walk that same road, so that we do not perpetrate those same actions. History tends to repeat itself, and it does it where there is rife ignorance, and so we don't want to do that. Phil, I love you, man. I love you.
Love you too, bro.
Listen. When I think about the apologetics community, I know you know Jesus. I don't know about that Damon Richardson. He's a Cowboy fan. All right. I don't know about that Damon Richardson, Doc, but you know Jesus. All right.
Shout out to Dave, my man.
I appreciate you, man. Hey, everybody.
You, Doc.
Like, share, subscribe if you haven't yet. I'm trying to grow this channel. By God's grace, we're seeing growth, but we need it to continue. Like, share, subscribe, and come along on this journey. You'll see Phil Fox here again soon. All right, y'all. Love y'all. Grace and peace. We out.
Peace.